This lecture forms part of a series with the overall title, The Inner Vision, held at the headquarters of the Theosophical Society, 50 Gloucester Place, London, W1U8EA, in the spring of the year 2004. It took place on Sunday the 28th of March, was entitled The Labours of Hercules, The Soul's Journey, and was given by Yiannis Pittis. The programme notes summarise its contents thus. Greek mythology can be interpreted in many ways, but the mystical approach reveals many fundamental esoteric lessons. Hercules represents the soul of each traveller in search of self-realization. His way of dealing with all the obstacles along the way can help us free ourselves from our own limitations. Yiannis Pittis is director of the Philalethia Holistic Healing School in Sussex.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's work. Obviously, the labors of Hercules relate to mythology, and we need to define what we mean by mythology. For me, mythology is the means by which the truths of one age are preserved and handed over to a new age. And so, from generation to generation, the old truths are represented again. They have a quality by means of which simultaneously they veil the truths from those that might misuse them, which we might call the profane, and at the same time they reveal the truths to those who are able to interpret them appropriately. So they contain certain symbols. Naturally, a symbol, as Madame Besant defined it, it's the outward and visible expression of an inward and invisible reality. They also contain the narrative, which is the field of labor for a particular person, for a race or a nationality, or for humanity as a whole. They also contain certain numerological significances. And as we know, numbers are but laws that govern manifested existence in all levels, in all dimensions. Pythagoras said that on the foundation of numbers, the edifice of creation is built. And indeed, mathematics is the only exact science by means of which all things can be interpreted if one understands mathematics as really the laws that govern all manifested existence. Now, there is a special language in mythology and in all actual religions, and this is a language of allegory. And within that language, there are certain simple ways by which we can interpret it. As an example, mountains represent high states of consciousness. Valleys represent fields of labor. Rivers represent the outflowing of energies from the source. And whenever we actually look at a mythology or a religious narrative, we have to see that ultimately the narrative's events symbolically represent inner events that are happening to an individual in his journey of evolution, or to a nation, or to a race. Now, the interesting thing is that if the narrative contains the story of ordinary people, then that symbolizes the early stages of evolution of mankind. If it contains so-called heroes, then it symbolizes the discipleship and advanced initiatic stages of evolution. And if the narrative relates to the behavior of gods, then it symbolizes the divine beings who have attained freedom from this cycle of learning upon this planet, which we might call masters or lords. And so in each of the narratives, there is the story that contains essentially these different truths. Now, the labors of Hercules, as any other mythology, can be interpreted in a threefold way. Literally or historically, which ultimately relates to the particular time and the events that happen to those people or to that individual, but also they can be interpreted mystically, i.e. the soul's journey in the evolutionary process and all the obstacles and difficulties and labors that it has to fulfill if it is to liberate itself from the suffering and pain and limitations of physical existence. it also contains what might be called the cosmic interpretation. Now, the cosmic interpretation may appear to be quite far-fetched because it relates to the relationship of our solar system with the greater family of constellations in the universe. And there is indeed an alliance of 12 constellations, and beings from each one of these alliances have agreed to certain rules and laws by means of which life upon the planets in their particular solar systems will unfold. But as we always know that on our planet Earth, as in other planets throughout the universal systems, there is always the conflict between the positive and negative polarity. And so naturally, there are those that are called the renegades in the Universal Alliance, and they also endeavor to colonize planets with their own particular policies that do not facilitate and do not align themselves with the whole Universal Alliance of cosmic laws, which completely and utterly highlight the free will of each entity to unfold as it so chooses, providing it does not interfere with the free will of any other entity. Now, of course, that is what the spiritual hierarchy of our planet and also the spiritual hierarchies of other solar systems have as their particular alliance. But naturally, that is not the way of the renegade forces. They choose to subdue the will of others and employ and use them as slaves or as instruments to serve their own particular designs. So there are certain cosmic events that have occurred upon this planet, and these are also veiled in mythological stories, such as the battles of the giants and the titans when the Olympian dynasty began in the ancient Greek times. Now, this also tells us about the whole story of the principle of the number 12, because the last time that we were in the Aquarian age, which we are now currently have begun, was 25,000 years ago, and it was at that time in ancient Greece when the Olympian dynasty actually began. And the Olympian dynasty cosmically symbolizes the very advanced beings who came from various constellations for the purpose of igniting the greater evolution of the human beings upon this planet. And the genetic structure of the human form had actually been tainted by some of the renegade experiments of genetic engineering. And that should call us to attention about the genetic engineering that is actually being attempted currently under the false belief system that they have cracked the code of the genetic DNA structure of the human being. From my understanding and what the greater teachers suggest is that they have only touched a tiny fragment, and there are billions of other hidden codes, and therefore to assume that they have cracked it and understood everything, and therefore all the engineering that they will do will be safe, it will be to take risks that can be very detrimental for the evolution of mankind. GM foods, as an example, is another way of attempting to enslave people, because they cannot have their own seed reproduction. They are totally going to be dependent on those companies that provide them with new seed each and every time. Now, of course, the Theosophical Society has nothing to do with such views. I am putting these views to you as a personal issue. So I don't want you to think that the Theosophical Society has actually got such views, because clearly each speaker has their own particular perception of the way of things, and they will voice it, and that's why you are here to perceive some of these elements as well, yeah? So what we are talking about is the story that in every religion and in every great mythology it is outlined, i.e. the symbolical journey of the sun through the 12 signs. This 12 principle is present everywhere. It is, of course, the 12 labors of Hercules. It is Jesus' story and the 12 disciples. It is Jacob and his 12 sons. It is Saratra and his 12 knights. It is Buddha and his 4 noble truths and his eightfold path, which make up the 12. And so the 12 songs of the Rig Vedas. And so the principle of the 12, wherever it is actually found, it is to do with that symbolical journey of the sun through the 12 particular signs and constellations. And so now to the story of Hercules. Hercules is called upon by his teacher, and the teacher asks, "What is thy name?" And he says, "My name is Hercules." And the teacher asks, "What does it actually mean?" And he says, "I am told that it means glory of era, the era's glory." And the era is the soul. And so Hercules represents the soul of each human being in his journey of evolution. And so the teacher asks, then what is the soul? And Hercules asks the teacher, "I am waiting to hear from you. What will be your explanation of the soul?" And the teacher says, "The soul is the I am presence. It is a ray of light which illuminates your personal journey. And through the labors that you will undergo, you will demonstrate ever greater intensity of that light, which ultimately will be found to be the goal of evolution, i.e., the greater the radiance of light, the more advanced that entity is. Whether we talk macrocosmically in terms of the sun, whose radiant light demonstrates greater advancement than the planet or the moon, or we are talking microcosmically in terms of the human being. Because the greater the light that radiates in the aura of the human being, the more advanced such a human being obviously is. And so the teacher then asks him, "How old are you?" And he says that 18 summers have passed when I have slain the lion and wear its skin. And at the age of 21, I met my bride and married her and produced 3 children. But I must tell you something, that long ago I have killed all of my teachers. And the teacher says, "That was a good deed, my son." And so, of course, if we take that literally, it will be an unthinkable suggestion that we must kill all our teachers. So obviously, wherever we find in a mythological narrative or in a religious narrative something that goes against the natural order of things and the natural intelligence, then it veils a hidden mystery. And we will interpret what that actually means as we go along. And so then he asks of his education. And boastfully Hercules answers that he had read all the books that he knew about, had known all the skills of the arts and science, and knows about agriculture, and had traveled and explored all things. And so the teacher said, "Be not too boastful too quickly, my son, for you may find that in your labors, the education that you have had may still not be enough for you to be perfectly successful." The next step that the teacher asked him was, what did he actually do to demonstrate that he is ready to begin this journey of the 12 tasks? And he said that when I was a babe, I actually strangled the 2 serpents in my cot. And thus I know that I am ready for this journey. I have the power and I am ready to take whatever task is given to me. At that time, the teacher asked the greater presiding one if there was anything else that he should do. And the presiding one asked that the gods are invoked to bring him all the gifts that will be appropriate for the journey of overcoming all the tasks and labors. So Athena came in her glory and gave him a beautiful gift of a robe of rare beauty and magnificence. He put it on and he delighted with pride in its radiance as the goddess herself had made it. Then Hephaestus, the god of fire, came and gave him a breastplate to protect the heart and where the center of the life force actually is hidden. Then Hermes comes along and straps on his thigh a beautiful, powerful sword and tells him that he must learn how to wield it appropriately, for it can divide and destroy, or it can actually protect. Apollo came and gave him the magnificent bow and arrow. And Neptune gave him 2 most brilliant stallions. Now Hercules, looking at all these gifts, he thought to himself that naturally as yet he was not ready to fully take advantage of these divine gifts. As every student on the path in the earlier stages is not able to actually make maximum use of all the divine gifts that we are given. And we will find out what those divine gifts actually are. Of course, he put down his gifts because he was not ready to fully use them, and ran into the forest, and out of a powerful tree he cut down his club, and he came back and showed it to the gods, and he said, "None have given me this. This is my own. I have formed it by my own strength. And it is by this that I would actually perform all my tasks. Wait and see, O great ones, the glory of thy Son. I will go forth and fulfill my tasks." The gods withdrew, and Hercules went in meditation to begin to prepare himself for the first task. Now, before we begin with the tasks, I think we should interpret a few of the factors of what actually relate to the story of Hercules himself. Now, the fact that he was actually married at the age of 21 and gave birth to 3 children, which he also killed, the symbolism of that relates to the mystery of the human being at the age of 21. Symbolically, we are always told that at the age of 21 we receive the keys of life, do we not? And we celebrate the 21st birthday. Now, that is 3 times 7. And of course, consciousness has 3 divine attributes: the will, the love wisdom, and the creative intelligence. The will being the energizing principle, the love wisdom being the cohesive principle, and the creative intelligence being the differentiating principle in the universe. And so, when we multiply these 3 factors of consciousness with the 7-fold expression of the vehicles of manifested existence, we have the 21. And therefore, that symbolizes that he had become aware of these 3 faculties and his 7-fold nature, and therefore, by the use of them, he could give birth to the 3 children, i.e. the fruits of appropriate use of these 3 divine faculties. However, he killed the children, which means that he killed not actually the 3 faculties, but the illusion of these 3 faculties as they manifest in the 3-fold personality of the physical, emotional, and mental vehicles. And naturally, some of the tasks have also to do with the different factors that Hercules, or any Hercules, any soul in the journey of evolution, will find upon the gross material plane, the astral plane, and the mental plane. Now, the strangling of the 2 serpents in his coat is symbolical of the first serpent of the attraction to the material control in manifested existence, and the second serpent of the illusion of separateness. That illusion of separateness is naturally manifesting in our personal consciousness when we are identified with the physical form, for all forms are governed by the principle of separateness, by the law of separateness. So your form appears to be separate than my form, and therefore we attach to that form as consciousness, assume that we are separate. But ultimately, as Theosophy declares, and as all scientists confirm, all life is one life, manifesting itself in the multiplicity of itself, having diversity, yet unity that is veiled within that diversity and multiplicity. And that principle of the illusion of separateness and the illusion of material attachment is the 2 serpents that, when they are actually killed or strangled or subdued, then the 3rd serpent can actually arise, and that 3rd serpent is the serpent of wisdom, by means of which one can manifest skill in action and express the loving nature of their own divine spiritual inheritance. The fact that Hercules has said to the gods, which I missed earlier on, that he was 4-cubit height, symbolizes the 4-fold nature of the human being, i.e. the gross material physical existence, the emotional existence, the psychological, mental existence, and the spiritual existence. And he was aware of these fourfold aspects, and therefore he was ready to demonstrate in those fourfold aspects of his existence the proof that he was ready for the journey ahead. The gifts are also symbolizing something very beautiful. The robe of Athena. You know, just like Joseph was given by Jacob the robe of many colors, so Athena gave to the Hercules her special robe. And we also have the message of the great robe of glory of Jesus. And always, whenever we hear of a robe, it simply contains, in a veiled language, the whole constitution of the human being, i.e., Athena gave him the wisdom of understanding the purpose of his actual constitution, his sevenfold vehicles, which are the robes which consciousness wears and manifests through. Apollo's bow and arrow symbolizes, really, the bow is the personality, and the arrow is that which we call spiritual aspiration. And it is only when we know how to use the bow effectively and really fire the arrow of aspiration to the heart of the spiritual essence that we are, that we can begin to become inflamed in our hearts by that spiritual fire that elevates, illuminates, and burns the dross of illusions and corrupted matter. The beautiful stallions of Neptune, they symbolize the magnificent powers of the emotional nature and the duality of the emotional nature of pleasure and pain. And of course, we must learn to ride the positive and negative aspects effectively and appropriately, without losing ourselves in the indulgence of the pleasures, nor becoming fearful of the times of pain, but being stable and the same, whether we are in moments of pleasure or in moments of pain, for both are in time and they will come to pass. And so the understanding of how to ride those two great stallions, and they were white stallions because naturally the emotions ultimately veil the power of the higher spiritual energies of love and the intuitive faculty, when they are utterly cleansed from the dross of the attachment and indulgence in the realm of pleasures and pains, which is the chain reaction of the world of personal existence. The breastplate that Hephaestus, the great god that produced all the powerful instruments that all the gods used, it's the protection seal, the electromagnetic protective shield that will enable his heart to be utterly free from any attacks from the insidious, so to speak. Ultimately, all of these gifts, until we learn how to apply them, they are of no real value. And so we must learn to use our own particular club. And what does that club represent? For Hercules represented the most developed and unfolded faculty within himself. And you each, as a Hercules on the path to self-realization, must discover what it is that your most effective and most developed tool in your consciousness is. And then use that to accelerate the evolution of all other qualities, faculties, and aspects of your nature. Now, it's very important that we understand what we are talking about. We can all just luxuriate in the natural evolution of the planet Earth, because Earth itself is alive and is evolving. Or we can apply our gifts, our divine gifts, and apply that most developed faculty within ourselves to accelerate our evolution. And currently, in this 25 grand cycle that we have begun again, as we are entering again the Aquarian age, already have entered it, there is a great spiritual dispensation that is washing over all planes and dimensions of existence. And it is appropriate that we learn how to absorb these higher spiritual energies and apply them to accelerate our freedom from the limitations and the suffering and the sorrow of our world. And this acceleration can happen if we begin to acknowledge that we have within us all the tools that we need to have. We don't have to go and buy new tools. We don't have to be dependent on anything other than the divine I Am presence and its faculties. We just need to have some simple guidance how to apply the faculties, how to use them effectively so that we can make that accelerated journey. Accelerated consciousness means to expand our consciousness to become more inclusive. And becoming more inclusive means dissolving the walls of separateness that separate one race from another, that separate one nation from another, one religious being from another, and thereby the ending of all conflict, the ending of all wars, internal or external. So the more all-inclusive we become in our consciousness, the more we attain that state of at-one-ment, the more we are bringing an end to all conflict and suffering upon this world. And so the journey of the soul through the 12 astrological influences is essentially to learn how to master the positive and negative energies that emanate from each and every one of these signs, so that it can liberate itself from the negative, make use of the positive, and fulfill the lessons that it has to learn on this plane of existence. And so each one of these astrological signs, in the initiations of Orpheus in the Eleusinian mysteries, the tasks of Hercules are directly linked in, with the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so in looking at the 12 signs of the zodiac and the 12 tasks of Hercules, there are three ways that we can interpret them, as we said. We can interpret them literally and historically. We can interpret them mystically or cosmically. We will concentrate on the mystical interpretation of as many of the tasks as we will be able to cover here today. But I will mention from time to time some of the cosmic elements and obviously of the historical elements. Now, the first and original Hercules was 25,000 years ago, where there was plenty of opportunity for great heroes to engage with the battles between the forces of the renegade intelligence and those of the alliance, to ensure that the evolution of mankind followed the natural evolution with free will in perfect accord with the will of our solar logos. And Hercules was one of them. But now, as it is the way in all the world events, when a great hero manifests such tremendous power, light, and selfless service and sacrifice, other beings honor him by taking his name. And so 12,000 years ago, another Hercules took the task and facilitated the battles of the Athenians with the Atlanteans. And then 8,000 years ago, another being known as Hercules again took the journey into the Far East and emancipated the various tribes that he met and manifested great establishments of civilized societies, and continued to inspire and give the teaching of the 12 Olympian gods. And 3,200 years ago was Hercules Archimedes, the one that mostly the books that are written refer to. But ultimately the 12 labor tasks were relating to the work that the original Hercules of 25,000 years did. And so the first task is the task which Hercules must do in the sign of Aries. There are three things that we always take on board. The first is the actual narrative of the labor itself. The second is the sign itself. And third is the constellations that relate to the particular sign. And so the first labor is the capturing of the brood mares of Diomedes. The capturing of the brood mares of Diomedes. Diomedes was a particular king, and in his fields there were these tremendous, powerful brood mares, means female horses, yes? And these female horses were flesh-eating female horses. And so they were devouring all and everyone, and many a hero went to tame them, and all were actually had failed. And so Hercules, with great power, went forth, and with great ease, actually had subdued the horses and got them restrained. But he found the task so easy that he actually handed them over to his friend Abderis and went off. But the horses were too powerful for his friend Abderis, and they overpowered him, and he lay dead under their feet. And so the first task began with a degree of failure, as it is with all disciples on the path, that when we first set our feet upon the path, there are always difficulties and obstacles and situations we do not fully and perfectly fulfill. So Hercules had to redo this task. And knowing, behold, he fulfilled it again and captured the horses and delivered them to the king Diomedes. And so the teacher called him to attention about the partial failure of his task, and that he must meditate and contemplate upon the reason why, and tame his pride and work with it so that it does not interfere with future tasks. Now we must ask, what are the brute mares symbolize? Now, as you know, Aries is the sign of the first sign in the zodiac constellations, and it relates to the rulership of the mind, and therefore the brute mares relate to the female nature of the mind that generates continuously thoughts which actually rob us of our energies, and continuously we lose ourselves in the thought forms of one kind or another, destructive thought forms. And you know very well that if you brood or concentrate on any destructive thought that arises, it only increases and consumes more your energies. And so learn to not brood over your destructive thought forms, but actually tame them and redirect and rechannel the forces from within them. It also symbolizes the way corrupt authority continues to survive by pressing upon the flesh of those that it enslaves and those that it makes use of. Whether the corrupt authority is religious, whether the corrupt authority is political, or the corrupt authority is our personal self-image that actually controls and robs us of the divine energies which are to be used to attain perfection, to attain at one-man with our own divine spiritual inheritance, whereas in fact it is used to pursue various goals of a temporary and transient kind. And therefore that temporal authority or authority of the personality is also can be termed a corrupt authority. And so we must learn how to actually overcome that corrupt authority of our personal power and surrender that personal power to our spiritual soul. Now, the ruler of this particular sign exoterically is Mars. And so we know that Mars, it's said, is exoterically the god of war. And how often the disciple or the student finds that there is war within himself. That's what St. Paul highlights, that I find that the different members within myself are at war with one another. And so it is that we must bring peace to all these warring elements. And in the concrete mind, the lower mind, naturally, because it analyzes and produces continuously separation and differentiation, and the awakening of that lower mind begins the process of that separation, conflicts arise out of the different fragments. The more fragments in your mind, the more conflicts there can be. The more war can be, the more your energies are actually consumed in the conflicts of one kind or another. But the esoteric ruler of Aries is Mercury or Hermes. And that means that ultimately the lower mind must fall under the guiding counsel of the higher mind that is all-embracing and all-pervasive, and therefore does not fall into the identification with one or other fragment that sets itself at war with another fragment. And so we need to reflect upon the nature of our minds and how we need to bring peace and quietness so that the higher mind can actually gain control of the lower mind. And this is the first union. You know that the journey is to attain union. The first union is to attain is that of the lower mind with the higher mind. The second union is that united mind now to fuse itself and unite with the spiritual soul. And that is the mystical union. And the third union is the divine union, when the spiritual soul itself unites with the monad or the divine I am. And therefore, through these three different marriages, or great marriages, the human soul attains perfection or at-one-ment. And so we must now reflect on the constellations. There are three constellations that relate to the sign of Aries. The first is Cassiopeia, the enthroned queen. The second is Cetus, and the third is Perseus. Now, Cassiopeia symbolizes the fact that in the earlier stages of our evolution, indeed, what is enthroned is material substance. So the controlling power is matter in the earlier stages of our evolution. And so the queen is Cassiopeia, which symbolizes the material power, until such time as we liberate consciousness from identification from that material power, and it becomes then the great authority, the enthroned authority. Now, Cetus is the actual monster which devours anything that is actually produced of any value. And Cetus is the monster that ultimately, in the ancient Greek mysteries, was devouring Andromeda that was chained by the rocks. And Perseus was the great being that came and liberated Andromeda. Now, this veils a divine mystery of a cosmic kind. And it relates to this because of the nature of the constellations into the first task. About 25,000 years ago, the beings from Andromeda and the beings from the solar system of Sirius came and inspired beings upon this planet, and with their assistance, they regained control of the evolution of mankind, which had fallen into the hands of those renegade beings that I have told about. Our genetic structure contains within it the Andromeda genes. And these Andromeda genes were chained to the rock of materiality, i.e., humanity was actually chained to the rock of materiality and was used genetically as guinea pigs for the selfish interests of colonization of these renegade forces. And so Perseus, which symbolizes beings from the constellation of Perseus, came with their forces and their assistance of earthly beings that had not yielded to the renegade forces and liberated humanity, i.e. our genes, from being genetically engineered towards losing their free will, losing their particular natural evolving way in a perfect alignment with the solar logos and its evolution, and being dominated by those renegade forces from various constellations where they have controlled and colonized various planets. Now, you may find this is all like science fiction, and I'm sure when Leonardo da Vinci was drawing the paintings of planes and all sorts of advanced projections which we now take for granted, he probably were thought of us crazy and certainly a crank. And today, various beings who write articles about the existence of superior intelligences, to some extent, are also thought of as cranks. But lo and behold, in due course, we will have all the evidence that are required to ensure that we have no doubt anymore that we are not alone in this universe, that there are advanced, intelligent beings who oversee the whole evolution of mankind. Humanity has never been left as an orphan. There have always been greater beings, whether they are of our own evolution or of higher evolutions, that have overseen the evolution. But because they totally respect the free will of mankind, they refuse to even force us on the right path. They lead us by example, they give inspirational, uplifting teachings, and only if we are falling by force under the spell of forces of the renegade kind or the destructive kind, then they may intervene to bring a balance. But we must make the choice. And each and every moment that you make choices to facilitate love and light in the world, each and every time that you do that, you declare that you are totally for the natural evolution that allows the free will of all to unfold at its own pace. And indeed, one of the great teachers, when he was asked, how did you attain liberation? He said, by making 1,000,000 right choices, or making 1,000,000 right decisions, appropriate decisions. And so making choices and making decisions is part of our journey of evolution. And it's absolutely necessary that we learn to do that. And so the first decision in the first task is to reflect upon our minds and see how it actually works, to understand the nature of the brooding feminine kind that constantly churns out thoughts, and ultimately Blavatsky tells us that the mind is the slayer of the real. And naturally these brood mares were devouring the flesh of students and others in the fields. And so it is with all our thinking patterns and all the programs that we actually have in ourselves. Naturally, you know that we have a conditioning pattern in our minds and we need to become aware of it. It's like having a map that is actually of Paris, but you are in London and you're looking to find a particular destination. However good you may be in reading the map, you will never get you to your destination because it is the wrong map. Conditioning, which constitutes what might be called wrong maps in our minds, you will not actually be able to attain the goal of your evolution. You will have to first of all change that map. So making right choices has to do with evaluating what kind of maps we have in our minds and how those maps control our behavior so that we can free ourselves from them. Now Perseus symbolizes that liberating soul again that can bring freedom to ourselves from these limitations of physical existence. And so the first task is simply that, the control of the mind. And in areas we have two powerful duties to fulfill. One is to restrain our consciousness from identifying with the involutionary force, with the involutionary forces that lead us to identification with the materiality of things. And secondly, to begin to redirect all our energies, to reorientate, to reconstruct, repolarize, and thereby regenerate our nature by pouring forth those energies that the lamb continuously outpours. As you know, in the Bible, the area sign is also called as the sacrificial lamb. And the sacrificial lamb is the first outpouring of spiritual energies so that all living things may have the opportunity to evolve and unfold. So we must realign ourselves with that spiritual outpouring forces from areas which can enable us to begin to initiate the right kind of decisions, the right kind of choices. So the Aries energy has to do with initiating new steps in our evolution and reorientating our forces from that of identification with the personal world to that with identification with the spiritual realities and the laws that govern manifested existence. The second labor is the labor of capturing the bull. And what does the bull represent? The bull represents, on the first level, our physical body. We must not kill the bull, but we must capture it and tame it, and learn how to appropriately make use of it. It's our laboratory. It is our true instrument by means of which we can attain mastery of the physical plane. Now, it is said that the bull wreaked havoc in the island of Crete, and there was where Hercules had to go to fulfill this task. He went and searched everywhere, and at long last he actually captured it. And it is said that 7 sisters were singing praises to Hercules when he captured and rode the bull. The 7 sisters, of course, represent the 7 Pleiades, which are near the saddle of the bull constellation. And the bull represents, as we said, the physical existence, the physical vehicle, the physical material energies. Now, we have tremendous force of polarity and attraction in the physical dimension. And in this particular sign of the Taurus, we need to learn how to tame that force of attraction, whether it be sexual attraction or physical attraction for all the material things to which we invest our energies, to amass ever more material things as if that was the goal of evolution. If we have a bank account with many zeros, we assume that we are successful and that we have really attained. And if we have many cars and many big houses, then we really are somebody special. When ultimately the most greatest and most special reality of attaining has to do with taming the wild beasts within our own nature. In the same way as we have tamed the horses and the cats and the dogs and the cows, and they have become faithful, domesticated helpers, so we must tame the wild beasts in our own inner jungle. And that is what the tasks of Hercules are all about, taming these wild beasts. And this physical form is but a beast. It shares all the appetites and natures like all other animals do. And we must learn how to tame it and how to ride it appropriately. Not kill it, not in an ascetic way cause it to suffer, for it is part of the divine reality. It is the Holy Spirit that has given us that gift, whether we call it Brahma, whether we call it Spirit, Holy Spirit, or whether we call it the creative divine intelligence. You did not build it by yourself. No one has been able, however advanced they are, to build a perfect human body as creation has given it to us as a wonderful gift. We must learn how to tame it. Now, when Hercules tamed and rode the bull, he must bring it to the 3 Cyclops. The 3 Cyclops were known by the names of Astrapes, Vrondes, and Energes. Astrapes means lightning, and Energes means energy and activity, and Vrondes is sound. And so these 3 Cyclops represent ultimately the 3 divine attributes of the spiritual soul. And so when we actually tame the bull, we must surrender it to the 3 divine attributes of our spiritual soul so that it makes perfect use of it. Ultimately, what that labor teaches us is how to become soul-infused personalities, how to allow the light of the soul to penetrate right through to the very dense elements of our physicality and guide it to fulfill its purpose. Now, in the sign of Taurus, we have one of the most brightest stars, which is known as Aldebaran, and it is the most brightest star in our universe. and it is known as the eye of Taurus, the eye of the bull. And the Lord Christ said in the Bible, if thy eye be single, then thy body shall be filled with light. And so the sign of Taurus and this particular labor veils the state of illumination. It veils the possibility for us to attain illumination. The one-eyed beings were those who had been able to attain that singular synthesizing one-eyed vision. And that is what we are also called upon to unfold in our current age. So this mythology does not only relate to past events and past tasks, but also to the current reality of what we must attain here, now, today. And that is intuitive faculty. The intuition is the synthesizing, unifying eye that is able to see directly the real, i.e. the spiritual seeing. And the Cyclops were known symbolically as the initiates. And so we are told in a veiled form that ultimately when we attain control of the physical form and we're surrendering to the soul, we have entered on the task of the first initiation, which is control of the physical form. And then, of course, we must go on and attain control of our astral form and control of our mental form and so on and so forth, until we attain all the initiations and thereby be true lords and masters of manifested existence, able to manifest the good and beautiful and the true in all aspects of our lives. And so the illumination in this constellation of Taurus, the third eye, which is the awakening of that eye of Taurus, the intuitive eye, is what we are called to surrender our endeavor and our physical work. Not for the purpose of becoming clairvoyant, not for the purpose of dazzling others with great psychic powers and CDs of one form or another, but for the purpose of actually perceiving the real and directing all our forces and all our energies to fulfill that task of our purpose in the scheme of creation. Can we cover a third one? Time is pressing on. Yes? Okay. The third task is that of the apples of Hesperides. This is a wonderful task. It's in the sign of Gemini and in the influences of Gemini that it relates to. In the old Bible, we have the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And Adam and Eve ate of one apple, and out of eating of that one apple, they began to descend in the realm of materiality. They felt naked, and so therefore they took the leaf to protect themselves and hide their nakedness, meaning that the naked soul incarnated in dense materiality and took physical vehicles and astral vehicles and mental vehicles to clothe itself. And so the eating of the apple has a direct relationship with the Adam's apple and the creative force that is actually hidden in our larynx, by means of which we can ultimately create and unfold that greater faculty of the intuitive kind. Because always function comes before the organ. You need to see, and therefore you develop the eye to see. You need to perceive the real, and therefore you will develop and unfold the faculty of seeing. So function comes before faculty, and any scientist will confirm that in the natural evolution of things. For all our faculties did not all evolve simultaneously. They were inherently potential within us, but they unfolded at different stages in our journey of evolution. And so, in this particular task, he must search not in a specific place, as in the first and the second task. The first task, she went into the kingdom of Diomedes, where the mayors were living. The second task, he went to the island of Crete, where the bull was held. But in this task, he must search the whole planet to find where the Garden of Hesperides is. And so he started to look for this particular garden, and he went first north, and his hidden teacher, Nereus, appeared to him in various ways, trying to reveal to him, in hints of one kind or another, the appropriate way to search. But he was too full of boastfulness once again, and did not take the hits. As often is the way, is it not, young students, when they are given some guiding hints from the teachers, they completely dismiss them because they know best. Always, the younger we are, the more we think we know. But the older we become, the more we realize how little we know. And that is the reality of any wise being who declares himself as an eternal student of the infinite journey of knowledge. And so he was searching for the great apples of knowledge, the multiple apples now, not only one. From north he turned south, and there he met Antareus. And Antareus is again the serpent, a powerful beast. And he wrestled very strongly with him, but constantly the beast defeated him. And so Hercules started to meditate and think, hang on a minute, I killed 2 serpents in my court when I was so young. How is it that this powerful serpent is able to succeed now when I am older and stronger and know so much more? And then there came to him one of the hints that he remembered from the teacher, that you win by kneeling and lifting thyself up. And so he applied that, and he knelt and lifted up the serpent, meaning that he lifted up his consciousness from the dense materiality into the higher realms, and thereby saw clearly the illusion which the serpent represents, and therefore he was free. But Antareus said to him, you shall meet me again in the 8th gate as the Hydra with the 9 heads. So we are not finished yet. The great illusion must be met again. And so then he turned due west and started asking for anybody if they had heard of this wonderful garden of Hesperides where the apples of divine wisdom lay. And here and there and everywhere, but nowhere to be found. And then one day appeared to him a great teacher with all the dazzling colors of robes of purple and violet, demonstrating that he was so advanced with crystals and glorious radiance of one kind or another. And Busiris said, thy journey has come to an end. I am the supreme teacher that you have been searching for. Here it is that I will give you all the teaching that your heart desires. And Hercules innocently listened to that teacher and took on board all that he had received. But Busiris was a deceiver. And so ultimately he actually bound Hercules to the altar of illusion and deception, and Hercules had to wrestle for over a year with his binding enslaved conditions to liberate himself. And eventually it is said that he liberated himself and bound the teacher to the altar of his own making. Now this is symbolically representing for us a tremendous hint on the path of our journey. How often teachers appear to us, all dazzling, promising instant enlightenment. You take this mantra and do it many, many times, 1,000 times, and you will attain blissfulness. Or you come with me and I will show you the meditation that is the ultimate meditation. The one that really will do away with all other meditations. But it is secret. You must never ever reveal it to anyone else. You must keep it to yourself and diligently serve me. And then at the end, when I see that you are ready, I will give you this secret meditation. And all manner of ways by means of which charlatans and deceivers of one kind or another catch in the net students innocently who waste not only years but probably sometimes lifetimes in the pursuit of the glamorous, instant, illuminating ways. And so did Hercules fall to that glamour. And naturally, we must be vigilant lest we actually fall to false teachings of one kind or another. Let us enter into the very heart of ourselves, the very essence of our own consciousness, and prudently evaluate whatever is given. And often it is said, when it appears to be too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Yes? Because, it is absolutely necessary that we have a dual process for evolution. We can have illumination in an instant, in the immanence of the now. Because the moment you realize an inner shift of one kind or another, you become illuminated. I give sometimes examples of this kind. There was this admiral who was in a battleship, and before all the radars and all this advanced equipment was there was a great mist, and in an exercise of other battleships as well, he could not actually see very well what was happening, so he didn't want to crash his battleship. So he sent the seaman right up at the top, and he said, "Can you see anything?" And the seaman said, "Yes, I see a light in the distance." He said, "Is it steady?" He said, "Yes, it is steady." So the admiral said, "Send him a message to move 20 degrees to the right." So in a Morse code, the seaman sent the message, and he gets back, "You move 20 degrees to the left." The admiral said, "Who on earth is this guy? I am the admiral in this exercise." Send the message back, says to the seaman, "I am an admiral of a battleship, and if you don't move 20 degrees to the right, there shall be consequences." And the answer comes back, "I am a lighthouse. You move 20 degrees to the left, or there will be consequences." So the admiral naturally have an instant moment of illumination. He indeed moved 20 degrees to the left. And so, indeed, we can have instant illumination moments, but then we must do the work to realign our physical form, our emotional form, our mental form. In one moment, you can realize that smoking is not an appropriate habit. And the doctor said, if you take another cigarette, you will surely die. And in that moment, you realize, you think, bloody hell, I don't want to die. I have responsibilities. I still want to enjoy life. I still want to fulfill things. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work to retrain the mental habit, to realign the emotional energy that is associated with the habit of smoking, and how you hold the cigarette, and how when the tea comes along, immediately that comes the cigarette out, or the rolling or the cigarette out of the packet. All the associated habits that you are attached to. And even the physical addiction of the form itself has to be overcome. There is where the student must realize there is a dual work. On the one hand, to refine, train the physical form, and on the other, to unfold ever greater, deeper aspects of the spiritual energies of the divine will, the divine life, wisdom, and the divine creative intelligence. And so Hercules again set himself on the journey. And at one point, after many, many false paths and false avenues, as we also have to do the same. We search here, we search there in the supermarkets of many philosophies and many religions until we actually find a true hint that speaks to the inner heart of ourselves, and then we follow it through. It may be to you that some friend gives you a particular book, or someone takes you in a particular lecture, or it may be that in your hour of need, when some crisis arises, when you have never thought of searching in the esoteric path, you are brought to a dead end and you need a solution to that end. It could be some disease that no doctors can cure, that sets you on the path searching for healers and teachers to find out. Whatever it is, at some point in the journey of the human being, there comes a moment where they find a hint that leads them towards the right path. And so did Hermes. And so he was told that in the highest mountains lay a plateau where the great garden of Hesperides, where the tree with the golden apples lay, but it was guarded by a great monster with 100 heads. There he must go and find it. But on his journey, he actually came across Prometheus. Now Prometheus was suffering, chained upon a rock, when a black vulture will descend and eat his liver during half the day, during the day, while during the night he grew up again. And so he heard the cry, and so he thought, do I do what I must and serve this fellow being and save them or liberate them, or do I go for my task? So for a moment he wrestled with that, and he decided to serve. And so he went and freed Prometheus. Now Prometheus is a beautiful, beautiful veiled story. When our genetic structure had been so interfered with, Zeus, the great ruler of all the gods, said, let us put an end to humankind and start from the beginning. But Prometheus defended humanity. Prometheus said, no, give them to me and give me a period of time, and I will work with them and drain out the poison of the old destructive programs, and I will realign them again with the appropriate line of evolution. And so he withdrew to the high mountains, and for a very long time, symbolically, he was chained to the rock of the material task of realigning the genetic structure of the human being. And ultimately, the spiritual soul of Hercules must do the same, that realigning process of all the wrong programs and the memory of destructive conditionings that exist within our physical, emotional, and mental structure. That is only one of the interpretations. Another is that Prometheus brought the fire that illuminates humanity to the human beings. He stole it, it is said, from the gods. And again, that has to do with the evolution and the uplifting of the genetic structure of the human being. And so Hercules, liberating him, he went forth and found Atlas holding the world. And again he thought, what must I do? This being is holding the whole world, he is tired, he is exhausted. And so he offered to hold the world for a moment if Atlas will go and help him to bring the apples to him. And knowing, behold, he took on the labor of holding the world, and Atlas, free for a moment, rejuvenated, went forth and brought the apples, the 3 golden apples, and along the 3 great sisters that guarded, along with the dragon, those apples. And they gave them to Hercules. And Hercules, taking the apples, was told that ultimately he had reached the goal, because truly the signposts to this fulfillment of the task is service. Deeds of love along the way are the signposts that lead to the way of service, to the way of sacrifice. And by him serving Prometheus and Atlas, i.e., willing to take world service on his shoulders, he was liberated and able to attain that greater wisdom that the apples represent. And so we are here on the physical plane. On the Western world, we are endeavoring to attain mastery of the material plane with wisdom and skill in action. And this skill in action must be galvanized by love, because in the absence of love, our actions can only be destructive actions. For love is the power that fuses all in oneness and thereby reveals that the good of the whole is also the good of the one, and not only the good of the separated self. And therefore all our actions must be under the auspices of the loving nature, the reality of knowing that all is one. And that is the wisdom that is attained when one fulfills the task of the apples of Hesperides. He has the wisdom to know that life is one, and thereby lives from the fruit of the tree of life. And as St. John the Divine said, he who eats of the fruit of the tree of life shall hunger no more, shall thirst no more, shall not walk in darkness, but shall live in the light of day forevermore. In the constellation of Gemini, which this task relates to, there are two stars of Pollux and Castor. And this is again the story of the personality and the soul, where the power of one must wane, whereas the power of the other must increase. And this story again was told in Jesus and John the Baptist, where he said, my influence must come to an end or subside, while his must increase. And it is the journey of every disciple, where through wisdom and love and understanding must bring the subduing of the authority and power of the personality kind, and thereby increase the power and light of the spiritual. And all the constellations that relate to this particular sign also confirm directly that. There is Orion, which is known as the Three Kings, and it was the Three Kings that came to bring the good news to the Jesus birth, which symbolizes the birth of the soul consciousness in the earthly plane, on the personal plane. And so, during the third task, we must ask the question regarding the kind of teaching, the kind of philosophy by which we live our lives. Is it deceiving us, or is it the true sublime philosophy that accelerates our journey to fulfill our part in the scheme of creation? So I know time is pressing upon us, so we must have a break and have a cup of tea, and for those of you that want to, you can come after and ask questions. Questions now and then the tea. Okay, however it is. So are there any questions that you have regarding what we have said so far, or regarding anything else to do with mythology? Or yes?
Thank you sincerely for a fascinating and brilliant talk. I'm not flattering you. I'm sure everybody here is a sincere compliment.
Thank you.
Not just what you say, but how you say it tells as much as mere words. May I tell you, I agree 100% with all your spiritual aspirations. I find it very difficult having a friendly argument with you. 5 minutes. But
okay.
Can I therefore apologetically ask you something that's very simplistic at a lower level of what you said?
Okay.
Because this is my obstacle. For some strange reason, I know a great deal of the spiritual aspirations, and I'm in complete rapport and sympathy. I love it and agree with it. So what am I bothering to ask you? Something that I'm almost ashamed to ask you, which is at such a low level, and you haven't touched on it. Well, you have, but not given me the answer I'm seeking. You mentioned the bull.
The bull, yes.
Of the body, I believe.
Yes, the physical body.
Well, this is my problem, which seems very low, but causes me a lot of concern, that when, as from time to time most people do, my body gives me pain or discomfort, a toothache, or even I've had enough sleep, I'm very annoyed that my real spiritual self doesn't keep in control, and it gets affected by the toothache. I feel less loving towards you. I'm ashamed to say this, I'm not boasting. If I've had 4 hours sleep, I don't feel so loving towards you. If I have a toothache and you speak to me on spiritual things, I have great difficulty with it. Now my question is twofold to do with this. Why is this so? The body seems a big nuisance in that way, to put it mildly. And can you give me, as a simple person, any practical guidance how to not let pain pull down me spiritually? That's my frustration.
Yes. First of all, let us answer the question, why does the physical body suffers in one form or another and has pain? It is not a punishment from God, and it certainly isn't that God is testing us by giving us pain. But it is actually a direct phenomena of the inner way of vibrating. So the way we vibrate, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we actually live our lives brings about influences in this physical form. The way these energies and forces are blended, if it is appropriate, harmony and well-being reigns, and no pain and the body is rested in the right appropriate times, rejuvenates and renews. It's a magnificent instrument that actually has inherent within it the ability to repair and to renew and revitalize itself if it is allowed to do so. But if consciousness is fretting constantly and vibrating with disturbing energies and forces, inappropriately related and blended, then it doesn't give the body the space to be at peace and do its natural repairing work. Therefore, we must ask ourselves the question, how can we ensure that we learn to use the 24-hour clock in an appropriate way so that we have work, we have play, and we have rest, so that we have a rhythm. So learning rhythm is one of the keys by means of which the body can be brought into a harmonious service for the spiritual soul, because the body is a creature of habit and loves habits. We must give it appropriate habits, i.e., those that are in perfect alignment with the rhythm of life. So we must learn that it has 7 systems, and each one of these 7 systems needs its appropriate due of energy and rest so that it can repair itself. The system of the digestive, the respiratory system, the circulatory system, and each one of them needs an appropriate attitude as you are the controlling influence within it. Just like a rider makes sure that exercises his horse. He actually feeds it appropriately. He looks after it. So must we see the body as the horse which needs, or the bull that needs to be fed, looked after, given the appropriate rhythm. We must learn how to breathe rightly. I promise you that 75% of various diseases and problems will come to an end if humanity was trained how to breathe appropriately. For the breath is the vehicle of vitality and force and prana. And part of the teaching of the science of yoga and the science of the true philosophies of life is to take on board the appropriate rhythmic breathing, which aligns our breath to the natural rhythm of life itself, which spiritualizes, enlivens, and harmonizes the physical form. And that is one such issue. So, going on with each of these systems, i.e., the circulation of the blood, the circulatory system, will also be improved if the respiratory system is working appropriately and rightly. And exercise is necessary for the physical form so that the circulatory system is working in its best condition. If we don't exercise the physical form, then everything starts becoming more fixed, more rigid, and thereby will create pains and aches. If we eat too much sugar, naturally our tooth, so indulgences in the realms of pleasures of the appetites that the body has, the physical appetites, create excesses of one kind or another. So ultimately what I'm saying is we need to apply our spiritual philosophy in a practical way to introduce the rhythms and practices that ultimately redirect our appetites to the essential needs for the physical form, which are very few and mostly are actually free from the universe, and not to the indulgences that we have artificially created as needs. See, there is natural, real needs, and there is artificial needs. And so much of our energy and time is poured and wasted to fulfill our artificial needs. And thereby, the real essential nature of our physical form suffers. And if we exert our energies in one direction and use more than its due share, let us say we use 100 degrees of energy, but we only needed to use 10 degrees for something, then we have robbed from other organs that energy. Those other organs will suffer, will create pain, and pain is an angel. It tells us that something is out of order. It calls us, it's like an alarm bell. Pain should be looked at as an alarm bell. It rings the bell to call us to attention about something being out of order, something being in discord, some intruder is coming in, we need to investigate. Not shut the pain, not kill the pain, but investigate and find out what it is so that we can actually cause the realignment, do the appropriate thing, and thereby pain comes to an end. So the first step in doing that is to not identify with the body, not identify with the pain, and thereby brood over it and increase it. Because then the brood mayor of the mind will direct the energy of thought upon it and increase it. And energy follows thought. Wherever our thoughts are focused, that's where our energy goes, and it increases the pain. But if we withdraw into our inner soul consciousness, investigate what actually is wrong, reorder it, realign it, and redirect the energy, then we will bring an end to the pain by bringing harmony to the condition that creates the pain. So by such means and simple applications, we can begin to gain control of our physical form and thereby eliminate the suffering that comes by virtue of its inappropriate, destructive, and unfortunate conditions that we put it through. It itself, it's perfect. We are given a perfect instrument. And ultimately, when our consciousness attains that state of being at one with our spirituality, then we will be able to dress the mortal with the immortal, as St. Paul says, and the corruptible with the incorruptible. And thereby this form will corrupt no more. And this is part of the task of every human being that ultimately will come to pass. There are beings who already have attained that and will keep a physical form for as long as they require it to fulfill a particular service for the good of the whole, and when it no longer needs it, they will dissolve it and offer back the materials to the ocean of universal substance from which they have taken it. So, if there are problems in our physical form, we must not go looking to God to say, why have you given these problems to me? It is we that we have created. And some of those problems are, of course, the ancient evil sharing that we all share, because there have been so many generations of human beings who, through wrong thinking, wrong acting, and vibrating inappropriately, have caused diseases, and these have gone back into the earth, and the earth substance itself has become tainted. So our vehicles are made out of 10 pence worth of chemicals and 10 gallons of water, which we borrow from the planet Earth. And if there is the tainted element of this disease in the planet Earth, then we also share that part of it. So there are some diseases that are inherent in the substance itself. Yes? And so there are some that are self-generated, some that have to do with our personal karma, family karma, national karma, racial karma, and humanity karma as a whole. So I hope I have answered your question somewhat.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes. Early on in your very good talk, you used various phrases about integration, wholeness, breaking down barriers,
yes,
which I very much agree with. I mean, both as a social ideal and as a spiritual goal.
Yes, sir.
As long as that wholeness doesn't mean uniformity, it means unity and diversity.
Correct.
Right. I just wanted
Correct.
to check.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Naturally, we need to understand that by having many nations and different races, actually there is divine wisdom behind it, because the whole of the family of humanity benefits. And if we were to relate with the different races and nations by looking what is the most beautiful and predominant characteristic that they are highlighting and they are developing, that we may share and benefit from, then we would actually see the beauty of the multiple different races and nationalities that all simultaneously are unfolding for the human family qualities of different kind and predominant elements of one or other. Some may be concentrating on the will, others may be concentrating on unfolding more the creative intelligence. And so we all as one family benefit by that. Because if we had only one race, only one nation, then the journey will be longer. Because all human beings have the opportunity of manifesting in different nationalities, different races, and benefiting of the racial stock, the national stock, and accelerating their evolution.